You can say farmers consciously organize to pursue their interests, and everybody will say, the farmers are organized. You can say machinists or auto workers are organizing, and everybody says, they're consciously organizing and pursuing, or school teachers or other people. But if you say that the people who own most of America and most of the world, if you say they consciously organize and pursue things to get what they want, then you hear people saying, "Oh, you have a conspiracy theory? You think they really do that?" The alternative to a conspiracy theory is an innocence theory. That is, they do all this stuff, but they're not pursuing self-interest. They just do it, you know. The other alternative is a somnambulist theory. Somnambulism is the tendency to walk in your sleep. David Rockefeller gets up in the morning and he says, "What am I going to do to advance my interests and protect my interests?" No, that would be conspiratorial. Hey, well, that stuff happens, whatever, yeah, hell, you know, it's okay. Another alternative would be coincidence theory. It's just a coincidence that this happened. What or sometimes a variation of coincidence theory is uncanny theory. Then there's stupidity theory and incompetence theory. Don't laugh at that one. That's used all the time. I have had about a 20-year argument with my co-politicists on the left to stop calling Ronald Reagan stupid, to stop calling George Bush stupid. It's good for a joke or something, but that guy knew what he was doing, and he did it. He got rid of the inheritance tax for the super rich. He cut corporate taxes down to almost nothing. He doubled the military budget. He waged two major wars and got this country into war and left it that way. He deregulated, well, actually another creep before him named Bill Clinton deregulated the banking system and all that to create this disaster that we've been facing. These guys know what they're doing, and they know who they're doing it for. They're doing it for themselves. But they will actually even use this idea of incompetence theory to save their asses. When Reagan was on the line and brought before that court because of Irã-Contras, after Poindexter fell on the sword for him and said, oh no, the president didn't know. Yeah, like they were going to do this whole scheme, these billions of dollars down to the Contras, conniving with Iran, all this. They're going to do this without telling the president, without clearing it with him. Cabinet level people are going to just do this. Of course. And then Weinberger and all these others. It turns out Reagan knew all about it. Reagan was the guy who okayed it. And Reagan's defense was incompetence theory, saying, you know, I just really got to get a better grasp on what's going on here. I should be more hands-on. And everybody going, "Oh, Ronnie, what a dumb dodo. He didn't know. All right, he doesn't go to jail. All right." Noam Chomsky, Alexander Cockburn, Chip Burlett, they denounce this conspiracy theory, and they say if you're a radical, you don't go looking at these little hokey-pokey secret plots. Most of them imagined, even a few might be real, so what? Because there's the larger, bigger picture you got to look at. He's surprised, and they are surprised to find out that they themselves are thought of as conspiracy theorists. There are people who think Noam Chomsky is a conspiracy theorist because of that second use of the term, that is, using it to mean a whole class power systemic intent that's directed toward certain kinds of forces. Behind the left rejection of the concept of conspiracy theory in academic circles is this structuralist, functionalist debate that's gone on. Many of you have not heard about this structuralist, functionalist debate over the years. You have every reason to be grateful that you haven't. It shows that you haven't been wasting your goddamn time on this issue. If you try to explain things through incidental or idiosyncratic analysis, this is very poor analysis, you know. if you try to say, well, the Spanish-American War happened because McKinley was all sort of scared and weak, and Teddy Roosevelt was a real bombastic, and these personalities of the actors, and that brought the war on, that is a very limited and dubious analysis of trying to explain historical phenomena. That the more impersonal and the more systemic, then the more radical. And the more systemic, the less volitional. The broader is the scope when you have a systemic analysis, and the deeper is the depth of your analysis. It is assumed. But what they're assuming here, you see, is a conflict between structural factors and functional factors, volitional factors, where people are consciously acting as actors with conscious intent. Because, in fact, the structure plays itself out through volitional forces. You have to have volitional forces. You know, you can say, is the CIA a systemic agency that's part of a whole overriding class interest that must mobilize power in a certain way and does these things and operates that way? Or is it a bunch of conspirators who are doing that? And there are those of us who say, why can't it be both? Don't A and B serve each other perfectly well? Here's another thing. Conspiracy theory, for some people, conspiracy theory, by definition, cannot be proven true. Because when it's proven true, it's declared to no longer be a conspiracy theory, but a fact. I mean, I've had arguments with people on the phone, and I realized, I said, so then the conspiracy theory does apply. I said, what conspiracy theory? That's a fact. You know, you proved to me that that's a fact. I said, but it's a conspiracy fact. It's people colluding in secret to pursue illegal and unlawful and immoral goals with the intent of advancing the interests of people who are not acknowledging their association to this action.
One theorist I will quote, J.G. McQuarrie, who wrote a book called The Veil and the Mask, a book which I recommend to you if you like bloated, turgid, self-inflated theorizing that never pauses to substantiate his pronouncements. And McQuarrie, he says, conspiratorial accounts of social dynamics are produced by vulgar Marxists. He further asserts that class interest is seldom a conscious matter. That's the cool position. Less cool than him was 1837, a congressperson by the name of Abraham Lincoln. And this is what Abraham Lincoln said in 1837, quote, "These capitalists generally act harmoniously," that's in concert, together, and in concert, they generally act harmoniously and in concert to fleece the people. Now today, Abe Lincoln would be dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. He is ascribing conscious intent to a class interest. We know that isn't the way it works, they say. Now, for some, conspiracy is by definition ridiculous and non-existent. But in fact, brothers and sisters, conspiracy is a very real thing. In fact, it's a concept in law. Conspiracy means people go to jail for it. It means planning or acting together in secret, especially for an unlawful or harmful purpose, often with the use of illegal means. It's come to mean, in fact, any machination, plot, or concerted deception. The state's major mode of operation I have maintained in my books, Democracy for the Few, Power and the Powerless, Sword and the Dollar, Inventing Reality. The major mode of operation is systemic and legalized rather than conspiratorial. Never argue that the state maintains itself conspiratorial. No ruling interest could last long if it tried to control an entire society through the manipulations of secret cabals. At the same time, no ruling class could survive if it wasn't attentive to its own interests, consciously trying to anticipate, control, or initiate events at home and abroad, both overtly and secretly. It's hard to imagine a modern state in which there'd be no conspiracies, no plans, no machinations, deceptions, or secrecies within the circles of power. In the United States, there have been conspiracies aplenty. And I'll list a bunch of them. These are all now a matter of public record. In recent decades, the deliberately fabricated Tonkin Gulf incident, which served as an excuse for escalating the Vietnam War. You mean the president deliberately lied to the people, to mislead the American people, and you're saying he had this whole conspiracy to get them all worked up for something that never happened? Yes. We now know, yes. The Pentagon Papers are out. Yes, it was a total fabrication and a lie. Operation Phoenix, which no one heard about, in which U.S. forces set up assassination squads that murdered thousands, tens of thousands of dissidents in Vietnam. Secretly organized, illegal, immoral, unpublicized. The Watergate break-in was a conspiracy, an illegal, secret, unlawful act, followed by another conspiracy, the second one, which was the one that brought Nixon down, the Watergate cover-up. The FBI COINTELPRO, involving dirty tricks, infiltration, and harassment of left dissident groups. I remember reading in the New York Times when the stories finally broke, and the Church Committee and all that. The august New York Times said, for years, left groups have been saying that the FBI has been harassing them, and we thought it was paranoia. Now it seems to turn out that there might be some truth in it. Well, welcome to reality, New York Times. Every so often, the Times hits right on reality like that, and it's worth mentioning because it's so rare. Irã-Contras, in which executive leaders conspired to circumvent the law, secretly, illegally selling arms to Iran in exchange for funds that were then used in covert actions against Nicaragua. A conspiracy which the Joint Congressional Committee investigating Irã-Contras said we will probably never get at the bottom of this immense conspiracy. That's what they said. It wasn't some conspiracy theorist. It was these people there. We will never get at the bottom of this. Certainly not the way you guys are investigating it. You would never get at the bottom of it. The function of the investigation is to uncover some stuff to let you know that the system is self-rectifying and self-cleansing, but not uncover too much as to destabilize the state itself. And you heard guys on the committee saying, we need a successful presidency. We must be careful what we're doing. All that. Conspiracies, I maintain, are carried out regularly by the national security state. What's the national security state? It's the White House Executive Office. It's elements within the State Department and the Pentagon. It's the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's the National Security Council, the National Security Agency, and the CIA and other intelligence agencies. That conglomeration or operational link groups in that conglomeration are what is known as the national security state. The national security state is involved in secretly planned operations around the globe. It resorts to low-intensity warfare, special forces, undercover agents, surveillance and infiltration and destruction of dissident groups, the bribing of state leaders, unlawful break-ins, the training of death squads and torturers, political assassination, counterinsurgency suppression, and terrorist military forces against revolutionary governments, as in Angola, Mozambique, and Nicaragua. Our rulers themselves explicitly call for conspiratorial activities. They publicly admit it. Except they don't call them conspiracies. They call them covert action, clandestine operations, special operations, and national security. If for some reason you don't want to call these undertakings conspiracies, don't call them conspiracies. Give them another name. Call them peekaboo operations, surprise, surprise initiatives. Call them whatever you want. But recognize them for what they are, as willfully planned actions whose real intentions are almost always denied. If they're not conspiring, why all the secrecy? I'm reminded of my friend Phil Agee. He was just here a few months ago, and I was sitting having coffee with him. He gave a talk here in Berkeley. When Phil left the CIA, disillusioned because he thought America was helping the world, and he found out America was doing something quite the opposite, and he left. He wrote a book called Inside the Company. The book was banned from the U.S., and I remember that. And the government said, national security is banned. And I said, well, wait a minute. The book has been published in Europe in French, German, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese. I said, and doesn't the KGB have anyone who reads French or German? The book was even available in English in Canada. No, The reason the ban was not intended to keep Agee's expose from foreign enemies, but from the American public. It was not national security, but the political interest of the national security state in continuing to deliberately lie and mislead the American public. Class rule is not achieved solely by pressure group politics, by interest group politics. Class rule is not achieved solely by big campaign donations, lobbyists, and other manifestations of interest group politics. Interest group politics operates within a systemic totality of power and class interest. It operates within the dynamics of a capitalist state system, which over and above the desires of any individual elites imposes its own necessities. It has to act as the agent of class control. It has to mobilize repressive forces at home and abroad. It has to limit and repress dissent. It has to control information and manipulate opinion. This is the essence of the state. That's what the state is about. It's to act as an overarching conscious agent, a conscious agent for maintaining the entire system, doing what no private interest group can do to buttress class hegemony. To put it simply, the function of the capitalist state is to sustain the capitalist order, and it must consciously be doing that. So for those who would deny conscious intent, we would ask, what is the function of the state?